Today we're going to be looking at the Korps of the Krieg army list, the infantry squads and grenadiers. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So we had a bit of a general talk about the Death Korps of Krieg the other week, their strengths and weaknesses as a faction, and today we're going to review their core troops choices, the Death Korps Infantry Squad and the Death Korps Storm Grenadiers Squad. And I thought, seeing as we're covering infantry, we may as well talk a bit about the Heavy Weapons Squad as well, even though that's a heavy supports choice, not a troops. In this video, we'll be taking a look at their data sheets, talking about any rules, combos and synergies, and talking about how I would run them on the table. In the background, the infantry squads form the backbone of the Krieg line and exemplify their cult of sacrifice, the mindset of every Krieg soldier that some days he will die for the God Emperor. They accept this fate willingly and dourly, knowing that everything is but a matter of time and attrition on the front lines of the many wars of the Imperium. The Death Korps of Krieg Infantry are provided with gas masks and hazardous environment training to better withstand the horrors of the 41st millennium. They are heavily drilled in volley-fire disciplines, with accuracy being of seconds importance to being able to fire all at the same time in one punishing volley. The Death Korps Grenadiers are a more elite formation amongst the Death Korps, formed amongst soldiers who have survived longer than they expect on the front, often drawn from the survivors of decimated squads or platoons. It is not an honour that a Death Korps soldier can refuse when they are asked to join the Grenadiers. It isn't even technically a promotion, and Grenadier squads are often thrown right into the thick of the action to achieve special missions. Grenadiers adopt skull face masks as a sign of respect that they know that the attrition rate is incredibly high amongst Grenadier formations. In battle, they carry the fearsome hotshot lasgun and are looked on with some respect by their more junior comrades. So here we have the datasheet for the Death Korps of Krieg Infantry. They're largely similar to any of the infantry squads that we'll see in the Imperial Guard, so we'll try and focus on the differences. Last week we did mention that they cost 5 points a model. They get weapon skill 3+ included in that. The squad gets to be armed with crack grenades as well as frag grenades, and the Death Korps Sergeant, known as a Watchmaster, gets to keep a lasgun instead of trading it for a las pistol, which is a helpful little bonus. The Watchmaster can trade his lasgun for one of the options on the Death Korps of Krieg ranged weapons list, which includes some interesting choices, including the standard bolt pistol and bolt gun, but also they can take hotshot las pistols, hotshot las guns, plasma pistols, or also pairs of bolt pistols, las pistols, or hotshot las pistols. Now, just keeping with the standard las gun isn't terrible. You certainly could pay the 1 point extra to upgrade to a bolt gun, or maybe the extra 5 points for a plasma pistol should you want a little bit close ranged firepower in the squad. While admittedly very cool, I can't really see the value in the dual pistol options. In general, you're going to be better off with a las gun than dual las pistols, or a bolt gun than dual bolt pistols. The hotshot las gun is an interesting choice, particularly now that it's free, meaning that you could certainly trade out your regular las gun for that if you wished, losing 6 inch of range to gain AP-2. So for me, for the Sergeant, I'd either stick with the standard las gun, upgrade to the hotshot or bolt gun if you feel like those serve you better, or maybe pay for a plasma pistol if you are trying to get that squad up and close to the enemy. The melee weapons have a little bit more value than some areas due to them having weapon skill 3+, but I still don't think that they're a massively good deal on a guardsman frame, to be honest. The standard chainsword would likely be my go-to if you are swapping out the lasgun, though if you do want a little bit of strength and AP, then the power axe, maul, sword and fist are all there if you really want them. They can take a Voxcaster for 5 points, which, as with normal infantry, isn't my favourite thing to do, as there's no real reason that officers can't just follow their infantry squads around, and I'd rather just have the extra points in more bodies. The infantry squad can also take a platoon standard, which costs 5 points, which, while being quite a fun upgrade, again isn't the most useful in the world, because all it does is add +1 to the leadership of nearby Death Korps of Krieg units, those within 6 inches to be exact, and Death Korps of Krieg don't exactly run away in the first place due to cult of sacrifice, at least from shooting. That means it'll only ever help you out in close combat, and probably if your Death Korps are in combat, they're likely getting pretty chewed up anyway. Finally, one other guardsman can replace one of their lasguns with a Death Korps of Krieg special weapon in the flamer, grenade launcher, melt gun or plasma gun. Usually my favourite from this list are the plasma weapons, but Death Korps aren't quite as synergistic with them as they don't have access to the order take aim, meaning that they can't reroll one, so the plasma is quite likely to blow them up if you overheat it. Similar with the normal infantry squad though, I still would have either the grenade launcher or a plasma gun as first choice. Perhaps the melter gun if you are thinking of getting them up and close with some sort of special delivery mechanism, and for me flamers just are a little bit short ranged and don't do much that the standard squad can't. We already mentioned it briefly, but they do have cult of sacrifice, ignoring casualties inflicted in the shooting phase for morale purposes, which is their biggest selling point for why they'd want to be run as Death Korps rather than just using standard infantry squads, and this is a decent bonus, no mistake. Overall, the Death Korps Infantry squad is very similar to the normal Guardsman squad, with the option for a lasgun sergeant, crack grenades, weapon skill 3+, cult of sacrifice, and the option for a platoon standard. If we move on to look at the Death Korps Grenadiers datasheet now, the other troops choice for Death Korps of Krieg. These guys come in squads of 5 and they're 8 points each, and for the additional points you get a hotshot lasgun and carapace armour, giving them a 4+ save. The Grenadier gets a hotshot las pistol instead of his hotshot lasgun, though he can and should swap it straight back from the Death Korps ranged weapons list, so you can have a full squad of hotshots if he doesn't want to take another option such as a plasma pistol or something. Again, he can also take melee weapons if desired. Again, one can take a Voxcaster, but this time 2 Grenadiers may take a special weapon, or replace their hotshot lasguns with a heavy stubber. Now the Death Korps Grenadiers have a ballistic skill of 3+, meaning that they're significantly better at shooting than their infantry squad counterparts. It does mean that they pay the higher price for plasma guns and melter guns, however, as they are split up that way in the Guard Codex, meaning that those choices are just a little bit less viable than they would be otherwise. In general, for me, unless you're finding some way to deliver them right close to the enemy to guarantee that you're using those plasma guns or melter guns, I'd take this as an opportunity to keep them cheap. Either just run the hotshots, which are quite decent, particularly with ballistic skill 3+, or maybe swap out for a grenade launcher or a heavy stubber. For a 2-point upgrade, the heavy stubber really isn't that bad a weapon at all, and can give you a few long-range accurate anti-infantry shots hidden within the squad. I think they don't synergise particularly well with the rest of the squad that's going to be wanting to move forwards quickly towards the enemy to try and get those hotshots in range, but at least they'll still hit on 4s even on the move. Finally, 2 other Grenadiers can form a Death Korps weapons team, and they can be equipped with a heavy flamer. Despite heavy flamer weapon teams being very cool as well, it's really not a great use of their ballistic skill 3+, as heavy flamers are pretty expensive in the first place, and then you're completely wasting their decent ballistic skill by having a weapon that auto hits. So in any sort of competitive setting, I probably would not take that. Finally, you can include up to 5 other Grenadiers, making it an 80-point squad if you haven't given them any upgrades. Overall, they're a slightly up-armoured and slightly more dangerous squad up close, but they do pay a price tag for this, and you will have to throw them in the general direction of the enemy lines if you want to get those hotshot lasguns in range. Finally, let's come to take a look at the heavy weapons squad for the Death Korps of Krieg, and again these ones are somewhat similar to the standard ones in Codex Astra Militarum. Again, they gain weapon skill 3+ and crack grenades, and they gain cult of sacrifice, which is actually quite handy on them, because if you lose a couple of heavy weapon teams, then you always have a 1 in 3 chance of the last one running in normal guard circumstances. So to just be able to completely ignore that is actually quite a decent bonus. Also, through some quirk of Death Korps being ignored in terms of rules and points updates somewhat, the Death Korps heavy weapon teams actually are slightly cheaper than their standard Imperial Guard counterparts, only being 5 points per model, rather than the standard 6 from the Imperial Guard book, so all round just a little bit more efficient than the Guard version. They also get to access more weapons from the Death Korps Krieg heavy weapons list, which includes all the standard ones, autocannon, heavy bolter, lascannon, missile launcher, mortar, but also twin heavy stubbers for 8 points, and a heavy flamer for 14 points. Heavy flamers are very close range, and very expensive, particularly on a slow moving, not very durable platform, so not exactly the strongest pick in the world, although I do think it would be very cool to have a few heavy flamer weapon teams piling out for transport to try and cook something, even if they're not all that effective in game. The twin heavy stubber is a more interesting option though, being 8 points for 6 strength 4 AP nothing shots at 36-inch range. Against infantry it certainly competes pretty well with the heavy bolter, so for a few 40-point squads throwing out 18 heavy stubber shots a turn, you could do worse really. It's pretty long range, fairly effective firepower point for point. All the other weapons basically do what they would in Codex Astra Militarum. Sadly, mortars are still 9 points for Death Korps as well as the standard guard. The guns all tend to be fairly balanced for what they do and how many points you invest for how much damage you get out. So how can we get more out of these infantry formations on the tabletop? Firstly, of course, we have orders. Without Mercy is going to be a decent go-to, both for infantry and grenadiers, turning all lasgun and hotshot lasguns into pistol 2 weapons, meaning that they can fire twice at their maximum range. Bring it down to reroll 1s to wound is certainly going to be a decent option as well, more so for heavy weapons or if you're taking special weapons in the squads. And move and forwards for the Emperor can be used to get them up the field just that little bit faster. In terms of other character support, you can use Death Korps Commissars or Marshal Venner to increase their leadership, though this really isn't all that necessary due to Cult of Sacrifice. It's only ever going to help you out in close combat, which is a bit of a shame really for these fancy leadership options, just not really being all that relevant to the Krieg. On the other hand, they can gain some decent benefits from the Death Korps of Krieg Quartermaster Carder, who can give nearby Kriegsmen a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, and potentially even restore dead models to the squad on a 4+. If you are using mass Krieg Infantry formations, then he's likely a decent pickup, and he will save you dead models over the course of the game. Finally, if you did make some use of other characters from Astra Militarum, there's always the psychic support from Astropaths to give them +1 to save or -1 to hit, or rerolls from things like Old Grudges and Yarrick. For the Grenadier squad, if you did want another way to get them close to the enemy, you could think about using a Marshal with the Dagger of Tusark. That could allow them to outflank and get those hotshot lasguns to work right from the first turn that they come in. You can also think about transport options for either of these. The Death Korps have a couple of their own in the Centaur Light Assault Carrier, which is a cheap little 50-point vehicle that can carry 5 Grenadiers, and when it does so, it gets to move them 9 inches before the game begins to hopefully get them closer to the enemy. This isn't really such a bad upgrade, as for 90 points that you could have a reasonably tough little vehicle and a disruptive squad of hotshot lasgunners to try and take the fight to the enemy. With a few of these, you really could clog up the midfield quite well. They wouldn't have the most spectacular damage output point for point, but they would certainly do a good job of being a tough nuisance. The Death Korps also have their Storm Chimera, which is very similar to a normal Chimera but a bit more expensive, and also has a turret-mounted autocannon rather than a multi-laser. Sadly, this thing is now 20 points more expensive than the standard Chimera at base, so Mechanized Krieg really just doesn't compare quite as well with Mechanized Guard, which isn't exactly the strongest build in the world as it is. In terms of stratagems in the main Guard Codex, as infantry there's always quite a lot of decently useful ones. One of the biggest standouts is the Grenadier stratagem, which actually could be pretty potent when you're combining it with crack grenades. Swapping out 10 lasgun shots for 10 strength 6 AP-1 damage D3 shots. If your Kriegsmen do manage to get close to a hard target, really isn't too bad for one command point at all. And you could even combine it with an order such as Bring It Down, for example. Unfortunately, rules are written, they're locked out of using consolidate squads for the infantry squads, as they don't actually have the infantry squad keywords. They're technically Death Korps infantry squads, though I'm sure in more casual games this might be negotiable with your opponents. Other useful ones for infantry can be Take Cover, which could be particularly handy on a squad of Grenadiers on an objective or something. You could be getting them a 2-up cover save if you combine them with actually being in cover as well. You can also think about things like Vengeance for Cadia as always, and Inspired Tactics if you need an extra order out of a nearby officer. So how would I actually use these guys in-game? Both of the units for a start do somewhat compete for the troops battlefield role, and in most normal circumstances I do feel that the standard Death Korps infantry squads win out. They are 10 points more expensive for a minimum size squad, so if you wanted minimum size Krieg battalions you will be looking at using some Grenadiers. But point for point I do feel that just the standard line infantry at 5 points a model for a standard guy with a lasgun do outcompete your standard Grenadier at 8 points a model. I just don't think that the ballistic skill, Hellgun and armor save really add up to being the best part of double the price. In general I'd typically be wanting to run the Krieg Infantry as either kept very cheap, maybe with a special weapon such as a grenade launcher or a plasma gun to add just a little bit of extra fire support. For the Grenadiers, it would vary a little bit as to how I would want to field them. I don't think that they do enormously well just advancing on foot into the heart of the battle. I think that they could justify either buying a Chimera, one of those Centaur carriers, or maybe outflanking them with the Dagger of Tusark or something. I think the squad size sort of varies depending on exactly what you're trying to get out of them. For minimum size squadrons to fill a battalion, obviously small squads are good, as are for the Centaurs. If you're advancing them on foot or outflanking them or putting them in a Chimera, I typically take bigger ones, maybe 10 models with hot shots to make good use of orders. When on the field, standard infantry squads are the go-to units for blocking movement, scoring objectives, and screening your more valuable units. As with regular guard, I'd be very tempted to use them to use move to get into the midfield, score objectives, and get in front of enemy elements that want to advance. I'd be wanting to keep them well supported with officers, to allow them to stay flexible either with mad movement, better shooting with their no mercy order, and allowing them to fall back and still shoot if they do get engaged in combat. If you do ever see the opportunity to use a cheeky Grenadiers strat, then that could be well worth a command point for the amount of damage it could do to a medium vehicle, and it's likely a move that your opponent wouldn't see coming. Even throwing some frag grenades might be a decent option, as of course they don't get access to first rank, second rank fire. For the Grenadiers, I think that the main aim is going to be jumping out of a transport vehicle or whatever delivery mechanism that you have and putting some high AP rounds into elite infantry. While they wander around, I'd certainly try and keep them in cover where possible, as having a 3+ save on guardsmen is pretty annoying, and they could hopefully do some decent work securing some objectives. In general, I'm afraid I don't think that either of these units compares amazingly well to the standard Imperial Guard Infantry Squad or Militarum Tempestus Scions. We've said this already, that the Death Korps of Krieg do get some cool bonuses, but just having that extra 1 point more is a much bigger deal than it sounds, as it is essentially a 25% hike in their value. I think, however, they're far closer to their standard guard equivalent than the poor Grenadiers are. Scions went down a lot in points recently, they're now 7 points, whereas the Grenadiers are 8, and the Scions get to deep strike for free. On top of that, the Scions also have all of their different custom regiments that they can choose from now, meaning that you can really tailor them as to what playstyle you want them to do. And they'll arguably do just as well, if not better, than the Death Korps Grenadiers, when they're just foot slogging across the board. I think Death Korps Grenadiers are certainly a unit that could use a decent points drop, maybe even down to 6 points before they'd see much play. On the other hand, the Death Korps heavy weapon teams do seem to be arguably better than a lot of the equivalents in Codex Astra Militarum, so at least that's something. Heavy weapon squads aren't the most competitive thing in the world right now, but it's good to see at least one area where the Death Korps may actually have a slight edge over the standard guard list. If you've got any insights to using Krieg Infantry, please let me know down in the comments below. We'll certainly be continuing with a few more Krieg reviews over the next few weeks. Death Riders will be up next, so if that's something you're interested in seeing, consider subscribing to the channel. If you've been enjoying all the guard content, feel free to support the channel on Patreon as well. Making all these videos does take quite a while, and the generous support of the channel's patrons is what allows me to focus on these YouTube videos quite so much. So if you are watching quite regularly, any support is greatly appreciated to help keep videos coming in the future. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.